Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm coming to you from Fern HQ in Brooklyn, New York, and today I want to talk a bit about great documentation. Stripe, the payment processing company, is often cited as having exemplar documentation, and I want to break down what makes their docs best in class and how we can create a recipe for Stripe level docs from those things. I think specifically there are three key things that make their docs a great user experience. And the first is that cohesive branded experience across all pages in their documentation. You can see that on their product webpage, on their documentation, and in their API reference, you have consistent styling, whether that's the colors used or the fonts, or even the icons on the tabs. That still makes the user feel like they're a part of the product, even when they're using documentation. Another aspect is the Stripe's clear orientation. So from the very beginning, when you hit the landing page on their docs, you can see the tabs that provide an overview of the sections that might be relevant, and they even have suggestions of pages that might be relevant depending on why you're coming to their docs. And then once you go to those pages, you have browsability from wherever you are, whether that's access to the different pages in a section on the left side of the screen, access to the different sections within the page on the right side of the screen, or even access to external resources. At the top in a drop-down, you have access to whatever you need to go to next from wherever you are in the docs. And so beyond just being able to navigate, documentation should be a tool for learning. And so I'm going to take a slight aside to talk about a teaching technique that was published by Dr. Fred Jones in his 2007 book, Tools for Teaching. And it outlined a research-backed technique called Say, See, Do. And in this technique, teachers, to reinforce learning, should first explain a concept, then show an example, and then allow students to work through an example on their own. And so Stripe uses this tool for learning inherently within their own documentation. So in their API reference, you can see on the left side of the screen that they say what's relevant for an endpoint. Then on the right side of the screen, you can see an example of that endpoint being used. And then you can even do and learn by example within their own documentation, sending a real request to their API and getting a real response back. So now at this point you might be asking, okay, so how can I do that within my own documentation? And that is where Fern comes in. Our documentation allows you to produce Stripe-like docs out of the box. All you need to do is provide markdown files, an API definition, and a few styling configurations, and we provide that branded, browsable, and interactive documentation experience that allows your users to get to know your product better. And so in the style of Dr. Jones, I've said a lot, but now let me show. So for our branded docs experience, you can see that on the left side of the screen, this web page has a strong style to it with the font and the coloring and the shadows being used. And Fern can produce documentation that matches that brand experience and again allows users to still feel like they're a part of the product from within the documentation. And Fern's documentation is browsable as well. So we allow developers to have access to these landing page orientation sections where a user will know which page they need to click into depending on what they're looking for. We also allow you to have access to these tabs and other helpful tools for navigation. And our documentation is interactive as well. So we can watch an example of RightBrain AI's docs where a user can log in and send an authenticated request to their API right from within the documentation and get a real response back. And so these three aspects that made Stripe's docs so great are accessible to you with Fern's doc tooling. And another thing you have access to is the docs team. It's not only a product, but it's also our dedication and commitment to wanting to help you to build great docs. And so now I've said a lot, I've shown a lot. If you want to learn by example, you can go to buildwithfern.com to get started for free today.